So how many of us have or are running or have a fintech idea startup? I see one hand here, one hand here, one hand here. Yeah? Well, everything is fintech these days, isn't it? That's what we're trying to find out. Okay, so but how many of us have heard about the Startup Act? Quite a few people. Interesting. Okay. So the Startup Act, like the very first ever, what would I call it? Policy, that identifies what a startup is in Nigeria and tries to create, policies around how startups should, like regulating startups, supporting startups. And so the next session, very briefly, is how the Startup Act, which was signed into law in October, I believe. Yeah? Yeah, October. How we can help your fintech startups scale. Very interesting, isn't it? Okay, so please welcome on stage Omoruyi. He's going to be sharing some insights on that. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I hope the colors of my sneakers are not off. When I was to come, this doesn't look like me. Okay, good morning. It's good to be here. I bring you greetings from the Nigerian Startup Project. And this morning, I'll be talking to you briefly about how the Nigerian Startup Act can help scale your fintech, right? The starting point is that technology has come, and technology is not just disrupting, technology is taking over completely. And it's a moving train. Some will say you have an option not to get on the train, right? Well, unfortunately, technology doesn't give you that option. It's either you hop into the train or it crushes you. Case in point, the mobile phones you could use back then, you can't use them anymore. And so one of the things that the next phase of the Nigerian economy points to is that data is the new oil. And tech and startups are going to be at the forefront of mining that oil. We're moving from the oil-based economy to the data-driven economy. They're going to be mined by startups like you and I. So I'm going to be talking to you about the Nigerian Startup Act and what it's all about. How many of you have heard about the Act? How many of you are optimistic about the Act? How many of you look forward to the benefits that the Act is going to bring to the table? Oh, the hands are... Anyway, hope at the end of this session you would feel different. Right, so the Nigerian Startup Act, signed into law on the 19th of October, is a joint initiative of the Nigerian tech startup ecosystem and the presidency to harness the potential of the Nigerian digital economy. It's aimed at ensuring that the law regulating the tech startup ecosystem are clear and planned. Now, this law is the first legislation in Nigeria that is not a regulator, but an enabler. The Startup Act was not enacted to regulate. It was enacted to support and enable. Now, how did we get there? We realized that to get an impactful law to regulate and support and build, you needed to have the input of the active players in the ecosystem. So this is not a law that was just prepared and foisted on the ecosystem, but a law that was a product of a joint collaboration between government and ecosystem players. So what did we say? Hey, what do you need to make your startups thrive, to make you scale, develop, and build phenomenal products? A, B, C, D. These are the things we need. And I know if I ask you what the problems are, you have, a lot of things, a lot of feedback to give me. One of which is fragmented regulation, distorted regulations. You have your startups, you really don't know where you need to get your licensing from, if you really even need a license. And then when you have troubleshooting problems, you don't know where to go to. Now, these are the issues that the Act is aiming to resolve, and that's why it's been enacted. Now, what will it do? It will provide a legal and institutional framework for the development of startups in Nigeria through the National Council for Digital Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Now, what's exciting is that this body that's going to be the main body that will see to the execution or implementation of the act is going to be made up of the president, the vice president, the relevant ministers in the different sectors that deal with startups, right? And also we'll have 4 members of the Startup Consultative Forum who could be any one of you sitting in this audience. The Startup Consultative Forum is a body that has been established flowing from this law where representatives of the startup community, active players in the ecosystem, will be part of the decision-making process. So here's the good news. No one is going to shave your head in your absence anymore. You're going to be part of the conversation. You're going to be part of the implementation, just the same way you were part of the enactment, right? And then it aims to provide an enabling environment for the establishment, development, and operation of startups in Nigeria, attraction and protection of investment in tech startups, provide for the development and growth of technology-related talent, and position Nigeria as a leader in the startup ecosystem in Africa, right? So in this, and you can take my word for it, take it to the bank, there's no regulation here. There's no regulate, control, ensure, no. The essence of it is to enable, to provide you the relevant support that you need to scale and grow. Now, another key thing before the screen comes up is the Act now clearly defines a startup. Does anyone have an idea of what a startup is? When you say startup, what do you mean? Right? Well, for time purpose, a startup is a company. Now, flowing from the Act, the Act defines a startup, right, as a company within 10 years of age that is, okay, it's back. All right. So who qualifies as a startup? A company in existence not more than 10 years whose objectives are the creation, innovation, production, development, adoption of a unique digital technology, innovative product, service, or process. So if you're in the tech space, you're building an innovative product, or you are leveraging on innovation and technology to deliver the service your company provides, and you're less than 10 years, you are a startup. So with this definition, does anyone qualify as a startup here? If you qualify as a startup, please raise your hand. So from 0 to 10, and you're leveraging on technology, you're building a technology-based or innovation-based product, or you're leveraging on technology to deliver the service you provide, then you qualify as a startup. So the good news is fintechs, like we all are here, or the bulk of you here are fintechs, fall under these definitions. So how would this act help you scale your fintech? Now, I know that the bulk of the problems startups have are regulation, especially those in the fintech space. You don't know whether you're going to CBN, you don't know whether you're dealing with SEC, you don't know what agency of government you're dealing with. Now, in order to resolve this issue, the Act provides for the startup portal. Now, the startup portal is going to be a watershed portal where startups can go and get all the regulatory approvals they need in one place. So, hey, I'm doing ABC. I go to the portal, and I can access all the licensing I need. I can access all the regulation I need from the agencies of government. So what the Act is going to do, is just to provide a warehouse for everyone to come into and provide that service. And also when you have troubleshooting problems, right? You have issues with renewals, or you have issues with even your registration. So we're going to have all the regulatory agencies of government that deal with startups, that provide regulation, licensing, and oversight over startup companies in one place. And through this portal, you can access your registration. It's never seen before, but it's going to help you scale. And especially when you want to troubleshoot, you have an access to troubleshoot. The next thing is facilitate fast tracking of startup participation in the Securities and Exchange Commission incubation programs, the CBN incubation, and other regulatory sandbox programs, right? This, is something you're familiar with in the fintech space. And so what the Act is going to do through the Secretariat is to facilitate your participation. So what this is doing is that it's streamlining to startups And what this presentation has also done is to further streamline to the tech space and how you can leverage on it. Now, also, the Secretariat is obligated, that makes it compulsory under the Act to help you secure your licenses. So you're not going to run this battle alone anymore. You're going to have the Secretariat help you secure all the relevant licensing you need in order for you to adequately run your business. So that's helping you scale, right? And then provide assistance to startups who want to be listed on the stock exchange or any, Nigerian Stock Exchange or any similar stock or commodities exchange. So as you begin to grow and scale, it'll also help you go public. And then you have the fiscal, we like money, right? We like to hear, the tax rebates and all that. The Act also provides. Now there's a startup investment seed fund. And now for the first time, there's going to be a law that obligates government to provide funding for startups. 10 billion annually is given to the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Fund, NSIA, to warehouse to provide funding support for startups and also to provide relief for tech hubs, accelerator, and incubator hubs. So, funding is one of the biggest issues we face as you build your startup. And the Act is trying to provide, 10 billion may not be that much, but you find that, in the initial years, you need just some basic funding support. And this fund is going to be there that's going to be assessed by startups. And guess what? It's a law. So even if this administration leaves and another administration comes, they are bound by this law. And this law was passed by the National Assembly, so it's not an executive order, right? So before you change it, you have to go back to the National Assembly. It's a long process. So you have a law that obligates government to provide some form of funding that will help you scale. And then credit guarantee scheme. Now, sometimes some of the things that startups need are simple guarantees. You need a guarantee to enable a financier fund you. Because you find that in your early years, you don't have the necessary collateral for the monies you need. So sometimes all you need is a guarantee that supports or that helps you get that funding. And from the Act, there's a provision that provides, a guarantee for startups to be able to access this funding. And then tax credit. Guess what? The investors who will invest in your startups will avail themselves of a 30%, the equivalent of 30% tax credit on their investments. Right? So what this also does is that it makes you attractive for investors. And it also provides free repatriation of their invested funds. So when their returns come in, they don't have to go through the bottlenecks and issues that they normally face. It's easy to repatriate their funds and get back. So this will make you attractive for investors to invest in your startup. And that ultimately will help you scale. And then, tax exemption for up to 5 years. Already under the Finance Act, there are certain provisions. And then there's where you're involved in research and development, whatever funds that are involved in that process is removed entirely, so you're not obligated to pay any fees. And then intellectual property support. The Act helps you maximize your intellectual property and also help you scale outside Nigeria, because intellectual property is localized. So when you register your trademark or your intellectual property in Nigeria, you probably need to register it anywhere else outside Nigeria if you're scaling to that place. Now, one of the benefits of the Act is that it's going to help you get those registrations, and it gives you a right of first refusal. And then how do you avail yourself, as that fintech startup, how do you avail yourself of the benefits under the Startup Act? Get labeled, right? The Act provides for startup labeling. And once you get labeled, you begin to avail yourself of the bulk of these benefits. And what does it mean? What does it take to get labeled? A certificate will be issued to you by the Secretariat that's going to be manned by NITSDA. And the requirements are it must be a company that meets the requirements, 0 to 10 years of existence, and must have 1/3 Nigerian ownership, and must be involved in a technology-based or innovative-based business, just the same way I gave you the definition at the beginning. And then, you must also ensure that it's a Nigerian, it has 1/3 Nigerian ownership. Now, it doesn't need to be domiciled in Nigeria. All you need to do is show in your books that you have 1/3 Nigerian ownership. But beyond those specific incentives for labeled startups, there are also general incentives like tech hubs and incubation hubs. Under the Act provides for establishment of technology development hubs across the entire country. So that will help budding startups to gain the insights they need to scale and grow. Training, that's going to be facilitated by Industrial Training Fund, accelerator and incubator hubs for startups across the country, and the likes. But all in all, the Startup Act will impact on all practice areas within the tech ecosystem, one of which is the fintech space. And it will enable an impactful growth of startups in Nigeria, including the fintech startups. And it will reverse the trend of high startup failure and also help propel the Nigerian economy. You are the miners of the new oil. And so you need all the requisite support that you need to grow. So what's the next thing? Connect with the Nigerian Startup Act. That's the website, startupact.ng. Once the portal is rolled out, all the information, you get it from the website. Also follow social media channels to gain all the relevant insights. It's important that if you're in the tech space, you follow very closely with what's going on, what we're doing at the Startup Act. Because even beyond the Act, we're also pushing all the state governments to adopt the Act. And the idea around this adoption is to help bring home. Startups there's no place called federal government. Every startup lives in the state. And there are also some licensing that state governments give, like payee, like business premises tax and all that. With adopting the Startup Act, one of the things we're going to push states to do is to provide free incentives, provide waivers, and other support that startups need while thriving in their states. So I think that's about it. Connect with us, and you'll get all the benefits you need from the Nigerian Startup Act.